All right, everybody. My name is Luis Maya. This is the Behavior Economics of Global Affairs, and I'm recording this video to wrap up the discussions that we had so far in the very beginning of this class, right? We talked a little bit about what the class is about. We discussed how we're going to try and start with like an individual behavior, an approach to behavior economics that's mostly focused on the individual behavior, right? Then we're going to move up to group behavior. And finally, we're going to reach like social behavior or collective behavior before we take a look at those big issues of our time, like immigration, poverty, discrimination, and all of it, sustainability, and all of those, okay? All right, so let me refresh your memory. In our class, we were talking about bounded rationality, which is a concept initially developed by Herbert Simon. So this guy back there in the 50s, he started to understand, or I'm sorry, he decided to propose that our way of thinking about rationality was not exactly the best. He realized that when we make choices, when we make decisions, we human beings, well, we do not exactly follow that pattern of behavior of pure rationality, right? He realized that we many times have to struggle with limited time. Sometimes we have incomplete information on making a choice, before making a choice. And we also have cognitive limitations, uh, our brains, they are not that much powerful, especially when we have too many details involved in a specific choice, right? Então, essas três questões, né, que estão envolvidas nessa visão da racionalidade limitada. As decisões muitas vezes são feitas ali pressionadas de tempo, a gente tem que tomar decisões rápidas. Algumas vezes a gente não tem um conjunto completo de informações para tomar a decisão e mesmo assim tem que tomar a decisão. E existem as limitações cognitivas, seja da quantidade de memória que a gente tem, seja da nossa capacidade de processar a informação, quando é muita informação, né? A gente tem dificuldade de lidar com aquilo para tomar a decisão, a melhor decisão. Então, ao invés de a gente pensar no ser humano como um otimizador, talvez a gente deveria pensar num tomador de decisão que busca um nível satisfatório suficiente. All right? So, this is the contrast between optimizing behavior and satisficing behavior. Satisficing being the sum of satisfy with sufficing, right? Okay, so we tend to make suboptimal decisions, and that happens quite often, right? These things, well, this idea, it has profound impacts when we try and create policies, or when we try to uh, understand what's going on. And I gave you a couple of examples before we finished our class. First one, it was the case of smoking, right? If someone smokes cigarettes, cigars, whatever, well, it is very likely that people will only suffer the consequences of that act 20, 30, or maybe 40 years later, right? So the consequences, they are not immediate. And we have like a very big difficulty. It is a challenge for us to make good decisions when the consequences of our decisions are not, very out there. You cannot see, you cannot touch them, you cannot feel the consequences immediately. We tend to say, oh, it's not going to be that bad, not me, I'm going to quit later. So, yeah, the same kind of thing happens, if you think about it, when people face the challenges of sustainability, like global warming, right? I mean, the consequences of our acts today will affect the future of our grandchildren, right? So it's hard to visualize that, and it is not even 100% sure what's going to happen. It can be very worse than what we predict at this time, but the point is the consequences are later in the future, and we tend to make poor choices when those circumstances arise. All right. All right. So that was the spark of behavior economics. And later on, Tversky and Kahneman, Daniel Kahneman, the guy I talked about to you, these guys came up with a whole agenda of studies, and they were focused mostly on heuristics and biases. Heuristics, em português, would be atalhos mentais, regrinhas de bolso que nos ajudam a tomar decisão acelerada, rápida. And biases, in Portuguese, would be vieses, são deslizes, equívocos previsíveis da maneira como a gente raciocina. Eles começaram a colecionar todas essas evidências e começar a dizer, olha, a economia deveria levar em conta essas coisas, não como exceções, mas talvez como a natureza do juízo humano. All right, so it was a long time before these guys got to be listened. You know, the economics profession was not immediately available to think about those issues, all right? All right, so much later, Kahneman actually he developed this theory and actually wrote a book that became very much famous. The name of the book is Fast and Slow, and his main idea was like this. In order to understand how our brains work, we should think of it as if it had two different systems. Então, a gente deveria pensar na nossa mente como se ela tivesse dois sistemas diferentes. All right, this is an analogy, okay? This is a theory, and it simplifies reality, right? If you study neurology, you're gonna realize that our brains are much more complex than this. But anyway, let's take a look at this theory, which is simpler, but it's also very powerful. So suppose that our brains consist of two systems. System one is like when you make decisions intuitively, automatically, or, like sometimes even unconscious. So if someone throws a ball at you, you're going to grab it immediately. It's like a reaction, right? So you don't stop and think and calculate anything. You just do it, right? System one is the one we use when we are trying to speak in our native language, for example. If you are speaking Portuguese like me, well, the words come to us naturally, right? We don't have to make an effort to speak. But when we are talking in a foreign language, we have to stop and sometimes think, what is the best expression? Exactly do you say such and such things? So it's a more reflective, it's a more deliberate analysis, right? So we have to use more and more resources of our brains. It's a weight. I mean, it's heavy work for our brains, right? All right, but if we believe or if we accept that our brains have like these two different modes, then we can, I don't know, try to explain some of the issues and some of the observations that we have, how people act. And it ended up being like a good explanation for how people behave, okay? So in system one, it's the fast thinking. We are all the time scanning the environment. We just select a few features of the reality to focus on, and we ignore lots and lots of other things. It is fast, but it's prone to mistakes, right? We can make mistakes very easily when we use this intuitive thinking, right? This fast thinking. But the point is, it is effortless. It's easy. We don't have to, dedicate a lot of attention to it. It just comes out naturally. A different thing is when you stop, you write down, and you think about some problem. Well, that's when we use system two. So it is like slow thinking. It is used for specific problems which require that sort of attention, that sort of dedication, right? It takes effort. Sometimes we get lazy or we want to save energy. Our brains, they are kind of economical. They try to not use too much energy. And many times we say, oh, I should think a little bit more about this. Oh, but then again, I'm just going to go with my feeling, my gut feeling, or something like that. So instead of using system two, I'm going to go with system one, right? But system two is slow, but it's more reliable, right? Because we are actually trying to verify our possible mistakes before we make a choice or we take a decision, right? Okay, so this is kind of a summary of examples of when you have system one and system two. Please notice that in this diagram here, system two is the first column, okay? And system one is the second column. So it's like inverted here. Automatic, uncontrolled, effortless. That is system one. And the one that is effortful, slow, and control, then it's system two, okay? So a few examples of this. If you are planning a journey, like planning a trip, you have to stop and you have to think, how many hours will I take from this point to that one? When I'm going to stop to eat something? You have to plan ahead. It is a completely different thing when you just take your car and you go to school or you go to work. You know the roads, you know the places where you're going to turn, you know everything, right? So sometimes you do that automatically. So you are using system one in that case, right? Now, why are we studying these things? Take a look at the picture that you have in front of you, okay? In both cases here, you have illustrations of someone making a decision about buying a refrigerator, right? In the first case, the message that you get there, it tries to emphasize to you 129 reais, right? 129 reais. And you have to pay a lot of attention if you want to realize that it is like 8 times 129, right? And many times you don't make the calculation. Think like 8 times 120, well, that is more than 1,000 reais. If you sum up all the installments, it is more than 1,000 reais, right? But when you look down in small letters, it is saying that if you pay spot, if you just take the money and pay for it, it would be 750. So this is kind of a stimulus trying to entrap you into buying because you only think about the installment, the amount you have to pay every month. So many times this sort of advertisement, this sort of marketing strategy is trying to get you and get your system one to make the decision. But when you study economics and when you study behavior economics and you want not take advantage of people, but to help people making better choices, then you have the second illustration here. Take a look at this. Now, it is very complicated to explain how much a refrigerator will spend in energy, how much that will cost you in reais. So it is like a complicated description. But with this illustration using colors, you can give people a fast message saying, look, this refrigerator is classified as A, letter A, and that means it is very, very efficient. It spends less energy than other equipments. All right, so once again, you're still using system one, but in one case, you're trying to take advantage of people. In the second case, you're using behavior economics to try and help people making better choices for themselves, right? You want to help people make their choices, not for me, not for the government, but for themselves. This is what behavior economics is about. And that's why we have to understand system one and system two when we should help people making those choices, right? Well, these kind of circumstances, they happen all the time. And throughout this class, we're going to talk about many of these conditions. There is something called anchoring effect. It's when you expose a person to a certain number before asking questions that apparently are unrelated to that number, but you keep remembering that number, and then sometimes you can make poor decisions about how much is expensive, how much is cheap, just because you were exposed to a certain number right before you make your decision, okay? We have something called availability effect. That is the probability of an event occurring. We perceive that probability to be higher when we see that thing more often. So if I work in a place where everybody uses white shirts like this, and if someone asks me, how large percentage of your clothes are white? Now, if I keep looking at my everyday life and I remember everybody using white, I would say, oh, maybe 30%, maybe 40%. So whatever we observe quite often, we tend to think that it is more likely, and that's not necessarily so. So we can make poor evaluations of probabilities or estimations of probabilities depending on how often we hear or we see a certain event, okay? And also we can tell here that affect matters. So what I'm trying to say is that system one is associated with many of those things that we call biases or heuristics, okay? It is not like it is always the same thing, but most of the times the biases, they happen because we tend to use system one a lot in our everyday decisions. Now, before I finish, let me just talk about these two biases that are very important for everyone here, okay? Present bias. Let's take a look at the definition of present bias. Viés presente, viés do presente. Present events are weighted more heavily than future ones, with huge impacts on savings and financial stability. In other words, our present self fails to predict accurately the preferences of our future selves. All right, so let's translate that to a more simple language, okay? If I ask you if you save money for the future, many people, many of my students will tell me, no, I don't have a savings account, not yet, maybe later or something like this. But if you think about it, every one of us should save some money for, emergencies or thinking about what we're going to need in the future, right? But it turns out that it is hard to create a saving habit because we want to use our money now. We know how much it can brings us satisfaction right now. So if you want to postpone that satisfaction, It is hard, like it is a struggle between you now and you in the future. And the present bias tells us that most of the times the now person wins over the future person, right? So we have this tendency to pay more attention to our needs now, uh, in comparison with our future needs. The second example I want to make here is what we call planning fallacy. And that I know that all my students will recognize, okay? It goes like this. If you have a task, if you have like a homework, and you're supposed to do it before Monday, let's say, okay? And then many times you say, okay, I'm going to do it on the weekend. All right, so here it comes. It is Saturday, and you say, okay, I'm going to work on that on Sunday. And then it is Sunday, and you say, oh, don't worry, I'm going to work on that by the end of the afternoon. And then it is the night of Sunday, and you realize that you're not going to have time enough to finish it. So we are too much optimistic about how long some task will take to be performed in the future. We plan poorly how much time it will take to finish a task when it is in the future. We are always optimistic, saying, oh yeah, time is going to be enough in the future or something like that. And that creates a problem, right? For example, if you think about savings, many people say, all right, it is important to save for retirement, but I'm going to start when I'm 30, maybe when I'm 35. And then when you are 35 years old, you say, no, I'm going to start next year. I'm going to start when I'm 40 years old. So we keep postponing it, not realizing that it can become too late, right? To save all the money that we will need when we retire. All right, so you can see that those characteristics of the human brain, they can have huge consequences for our lives, okay? All right, guys, so this is what I wanted to discuss with you. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you didn't understand something, go back, watch it again, and introduce subtitles. It's going to be a little bit easier, all right? And here, just as a reminder, you have those two videos that I suggested for you, and those are very interesting videos, okay? One is with Dan O'Reilly, and the other one was with Esther Duflo. They are short videos, 15, 17 minutes each of them, and they are fascinating. If you have trouble understanding, listening to what people are saying there, don't worry, you can use subtitles, okay? As long as you practice your listening, you're going to be listening in English and you can watch it with subtitles. All right? Okay, guys, I'll see you next time. Take it easy. Bye bye.